Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage. My name is Akram Burton. I'm the executive director. I'm really pleased to be a part of this program and to collaborate with the Filson. We hope that we be able to continue to do more partnerships in the future. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Patrick Lewis. I'm the president and CEO of the Filson Historical Society. Thank you all sincerely for joining us here tonight and for rescheduling and accommodating our weather so that we could all be here. I would really love to thank Akram for this opportunity. I have dreamed about Filson programming in this space for a very long time, and again, first of many to come. Really proud of tonight. Thank you, of course, to Dr. Jacqueline Hudson, our African American History Program Manager, for being the conduit to set this program up, and of course to Simmon College, our partner just up the street from the Filson, for having such incredible faculty. Thanks again for joining us for Alleyways, Early Residential Patterns of Louisville, Kentucky, and what it says about Louisville's current residential patterns. Before I introduce our speaker, just a quick reminder, silence your phones. Now it's my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker tonight. Dr. Camara Douglas graduated with his Ph.D. from the University of Louisville in Pan-African Studies in 2022. He received a bachelor's degree in sociology from UofL. His first master's degree was completed in the sociology department at UofL in 2007, with a second master's degree in Pan-African Studies in 2007, also from UofL. His research focus areas are the disproportionate educational achievement levels for African Americans in K-12 public schools, with a focus on teacher bias. Additional research includes an examination of the historic trends of redlining, which caused generations of African American students to live in underdeveloped communities and attend underdeveloped schools. Dr. Douglas is currently an assistant professor in the sociology department at Simmon College, an HBCU in Louisville, Kentucky. Dr. Douglas has also had the pleasure of conducting JCPS professional development panel sessions. Each session discussed civil rights in the South with specific interest in the movement's association with Louisville. Before Dr. Douglas's acceptance as a full professor at Simmons, he was a community outreach specialist at Russell, a place of promise, with a focus on home ownership and community collective ownership as part of Cities United, which does national community violence integration. What an incredible scholar we have tonight. Welcome, Dr. Douglas.
All right. First, I would like to extend a thank you to all of you and myself for coming and joining to hear a part of my research this evening. Before I begin, I would also like to extend my thank you to Dr. Hudson and the Filson Historical Society for inviting me to do this lecture, and also to the Kentucky Center for African American Heritage for hosting this event. It would be remiss of me if I did not start this off right, with this being Black History Month. I would like to greet you all with a Swahili term, which is habari gani. Habari gani, translation means what's the word. So it's simply a saying of like, what's up? So I greet you all, habari gani, this evening. Also, too, another traditional African heritage is call and response. So usually call and response goes with me saying one thing and then you all repeating back with a certain line. But this evening, we're going to do it a little bit different. As I am conducting this lecture, if you all have a thought or if something hits you powerful and you have a word or something you want to shout, please feel free to let it out. Please do. Okay. All right. So, with that being said, welcome to Alleyways, Early Residential Patterns in Louisville, Kentucky, and what it says about Louisville's current residential patterns. So briefly to speak on my pathway to discovery, as Dr. Pat was stating, my earlier research was looking at disproportionate rates inside of education, specifically in public education. From that, I realized too that individuals' residential locality dictates in pretty instances the schools that they actually attend, and it also dictates the amount of funding that is funded to that school. From there, I then understood that the reason that the Black population and other minorities in America live the way that they live and live in the places that they do is due to residential government sanctioned violence. Now, this violence, of course, is not the violence that takes on an immediate physical context necessarily, but this is the type of violence that has generational and lasting effects. Okay? And from there as well, too, as I begin to dive into this research, I've always had the question of why do these things continue? But when you have a system or you have a country that's set up the way that we do, not a lot of people question the rules and the regulations of the society if they are sitting at the top of the society. All those questions usually come from the individuals that are being marginalized and sit at the bottom. So usually when individuals speak of Louisville history, it is told from the dominant white power structure that has structured the city of Louisville, and it has not been told from those who have been marginalized since its inception. So today, I give you the take of those who have been marginalized in the city, what I like to call a true aspect of Louisville history. Okay, so this evening, there are some things that you should be expecting to hear about. We're going to be talking about early Black Louisville political, social, residential, and economic patterns. We're going to be talking about the socio-historical perspectives of Russell, resulting in the treatment of Blacks based on their residency, governmental violence of Black Louisvillians, desegregation, urban renewal, and white flight. We'll look at Louisville reset, and then we will look at residential discrimination post the Louisville merger of 2003. It's important, of course, with these things and these images too, also, I want to explain to you all the various limitations. Some of the research that I was able to locate and to find, it has limits. Not all of the information that I needed for this research project was identified, labeled, and dated correctly. But when I get to those images, I will explain to you my reasoning and how I was able to just and dictate what time these pictures actually were taken. But the way that they were grouped, it was all just together. There was no designation of streets, more so just by the neighborhood that it was in. So I know you all can see this, but I'm going to read this out loud to you. Blacks, both slave and free, contributed a great deal to the Louisville economy. Slaves worked as draymen on the docks and in the hemp, iron, and tobacco industries. With the growth of the abolitionist movement, the percentage of whites owning slaves in Louisville dropped between 1820 and 1840, as many blacks were sold to industry. Industrial slaves usually lived at or near the places of work. One hemp factory provided a tenement for its workers. Before emancipation, the Black population was dispersed throughout the city. Slaves lived in or behind their owner's residence, often in shacks facing alleys. Black churches and other institutions were located on the city's edge. Now also, when we are talking about this time frame, the city of Louisville, the way in which it is structured now by its size, is not at all the same size that it is at the time that they are speaking of. So in the 1820s, the time frame that they are speaking of, the majority of what you had in Louisville was a small portion of the downtown business district immediately to your east. You had portions of Old Louisville, and you had the Russell neighborhood that we are currently sitting in. So when they say that individuals were dispersed throughout the city, they are saying that these Black individuals were dispersed through the Russell neighborhood and through the downtown business districts. That's what they are directly referring to. And the alleyways that they are discussing, of course, are all of the alleyways that you see around you. Also important in this statement is the fact, too, of this mention of tobacco and hemp growing. The Russell neighborhood along the corridor between 30th and 28th Street was known as Tobacco Row. Okay? So all of the tobacco produced came through that area on its way getting shipped out of the city. Now, this states that in 1820, slaves began to be sold to actual industrial factories. Now, the first train did not come to Louisville until 1859. So there's 39 years of industrial slaves carrying loads of hemp and tobacco to ships or to carts or to other modes of transportation. And with that, of course, with the blacks in Louisville, technically not being fully emancipated, they did have some forms of agency that they could enact for themselves, and they also had a lot more freedoms than most of the other blacks who were enslaved in the state of Kentucky had. And from that, of course, there was a separate type of relationship between the white industrial owners and the actual industrial slaves. As they stated, the slaves would work and then live behind the factory. So in this instance, they had to report to work and then they went back home to their shacks. So there was a distinction and there was an understanding that, yes, you live behind me, but you are only here to work. This is the only function that you serve. And any other function beyond that, it's something that potentially challenges the white dominant power structure that exists in Louisville at this time. So in 1828, about 8 years post what is stated that the slaves began to sold to industries, the city of Louisville became the first incorporated city in Kentucky. Now we know that Louisville, of course, has an exception date before that, but in 1828, they could collect tax dollars. So when you can collect tax dollars, that means that you can develop public buildings, public institutions, and you have public funds that are supposed to be provided and shared through the citizens of that city. And African Americans, as early as the 1930s, begin to purchase properties in the West End. So this is evidence that even as early as the 1830s, the blacks in Louisville had enough economic and social power to be able to purchase properties in a time in American history where a lot of people think that is unheard of. So what this states is that the Russell neighborhood has an extensive history of black ownership, and it also has an extensive history of blacks attempting to stand and just wanting to live and be respected. And so the Russell neighborhood originally was inhabited, I believe, by Germans and Irish, but of course, as blacks begin to move in, the same thing happened in most historically predominant white neighborhoods, but you have white flight that begins to actually pull out and to strip the economic source and also the political source from that area that they once lived in. And two, with them leaving, there's a certain level of animosity that's potentially built up. Here it is, you have a city that you have constructed, you have slaves that you have turned into industrial workers. And now all of a sudden you have those slaves that were once just your workers and living in your alleys that are purchasing properties and are demanding to be treated with full citizenship. So when you have this setup that exists and you have individuals that are pushing against this setup, this feels as if that they are threatening the structure of the city. So it causes those white individuals to have this certain ideology and a mindset when they are examining, looking at, and also treating black individuals. Now, for the early form of political power for the blacks inside the city of Louisville, just 5 years after emancipations, the blacks in Louisville begin to use their social and their political will to fight against oppression and discrimination. This image that you see on the screen is also an image that you can see here to the right. So this is representative of the 1870 Charlie Carr protest. So about 300 black individuals met outside of Quinn Chapel on 9th and Chestnut. As the trolley car approached on 9th and Walnut, 3 black men approached the trolley car, put a coin in, and attempted to hop on the trolley. They were trying to go against the trolley company's statement that blacks were not allowed to ride on the trolley unless it fit their guidelines. So at this time, black males could ride the trolley only one at a time, and they had to ride in the front with the person that was actually controlling the horse. Black women could ride the trolley if the trolley driver wanted to let them on. Usually they had to ride in the back. And in some places where I found information, it was saying about 3 to 4 black women at a time could ride on the trolley, but no more numbers than that. But what these individuals were doing is they were questioning the constitutionality of them stating that they did not have the right to ride the trolley. These individuals, these Black individuals that were on the trolley, were attempting just to get their rights as citizens and to be able to travel to and from their places of work in their leisure. Now, with that first image that I showed you that dictates the early social and political structure of the Black society, the city of Louisville, Louisville itself, right at the turn, the ending rather, of the 19th century, was like the top third populated city in America for Black individuals. And that this was because, of course, the way in which the Blacks were treated in Louisville was different because you had industrial slaves working at factories in Louisville for 40 plus years prior to emancipation. So individuals knew that the Blacks in Louisville had slightly more autonomy than other Blacks throughout the state did. So as their word traveled and individuals were emancipated, a large portion of Blacks came to the city. Now, with this incoming fluctuation of Blacks, you also have now this white power structure that has Black people coming to the city that are not used to the ways of polite racism that exist in Louisville. And that polite racism is basically, you can exist, but don't bother me. Okay? So those other individuals, the other free slaves that were coming, they did not know those rules. So as they begin to come into the city, their white dominant power structure begin to figure out how they could then continue to control those individuals. One of the other notable Black neighborhoods from early Louisville that exists today is Smoketown. So it's stated that individuals started to inhabit the Smoketown area around 1850. And also stated that Blacks began to move in shortly after, and the larger influx of them, of course, came post-emancipation after 1865. Important for this area is two things. This area was not known for Black ownership. In this area of the city, predominantly whites owned the buildings, and the Black individuals were renting out the houses from those individuals. And two, depending on the various maps that you look at, some of them have Smoketown included inside of the city limits, and some of them have them almost right outside of the old city limits. But in my mind, I would like to suggest that this was probably one of the closest other parts that was actually included inside of what was known as Louisville at that time. And if you feel free to, please read the information that I have on there. There's just additional things that I have in case you're interested. When I'm speaking, it's not necessarily on the screen. The next notable African-American neighborhood was Little Africa. So Little Africa is now the Parkland neighborhood and almost where you have Park Duval as well. So that area was originally habited about 1870, and it was originally called Needmore. So when the Blacks began to come up from other parts of Kentucky and other states further south, a lot of them rested in this area. This area, Needmore, started off as a shanty town in about 1870, and about 50 years later, that Black community on themselves was able to develop a thriving community internally. Now, Little Africa, as I was stating, that would have been a portion that was not included in the original city limits of Louisville around 1820, 1840. That would not be part of the city limits. So as I was talking about historical Louisville, these places were not actually included in the research because they were not Louisville. The next historically Black neighborhood is Petersburg, or Newburgh/Petersburg. This area was purchased by a couple in 1820, and they began to section off about 40 acres and to begin to sell lots to Black individuals as they begin to get emancipated. Now, this neighborhood, since its inception, or during its inception, this neighborhood would have been one that could have been stated to be completely owned by Blacks because it was Black individuals that purchased the acres, and it was also Black individuals that were selling and renting those acres out to other Black individuals. So this portion of the city, this particular area would have been fully Black owned. But it was not this would not be included in information on Louisville historically because it was not in the original outline of Louisville. And then we have Berrytown. Berrytown is also still in existence. It was started in about 1874 by Alfred Berry, who was a free black man. It purchased about 5 acres of land. He was a former slave as well. Interesting with Berrytown is that it sits adjacent to the only portion of Jefferson County still that has not joined the merger, which is Anchorage. So of course it was stated through other additional research that I have conducted that a large portion of that original black population that lived in Berrytown served in the homes as workers for the whites that lived inside of Anchorage. Okay, so now we come back to the city of Louisville, which is Russell. Now, I needed to mention those other communities because as we move on through this and we begin to discuss how the residential districts have been dispersed and set up, these other areas that were originally not part of the city of Louisville were included into the city of Louisville as early as like 1930. And the reason, of course, that they were included into the city of Louisville because these black populations did not have actual political power with the city of Louisville. So these different areas did not have individuals they could send to the city as their representative to demand how much tax that they would have to pay or to demand the policing. So since they could control these areas by simply incorporating them, that's what they decided to do later on. But because Russell, by about 1830, when you have the blacks that begin to buy the properties, this would have been west of 9th Street. In this neighborhood of Russell began to become more predominantly black around the 1930s. And again, as you see, as you are leaving out, since you are sitting in the Russell neighborhood, you can still see these massive, large Victorian mansions and some of the antebellum churches that existed during this time as well. So that too, I would suggest adds on another layer to the way in which that the Louisville's white dominant power structure was mandating and dictating the white ideals. So here it is again, a portion of the city, this Russell community that has these big Victorian mansions and they once housed free blacks or industrial slave blacks in the alleyways. Now this community is one that is dominated predominantly by blacks. So as those whites originally begin to leave out, they did not continue to have connections with those black individuals. So in their mind, as they leave out of the community, they have the animosity for being forced to move, and they also see those black individuals as these alley dwellers. So in the mind of them, how dare somebody that lived in an alley who I once owned stand up and ask and demand to be treated like a citizen. So those are the ideals that these individuals were dealing with as they were moving outwards, as they were doing white flight. 1 second. And now this is a big chunk, but this is also very important for me to read this out because it details a little bit more about these earlier residential and pattern structures that existed in the Russell community. So until 1890s, Louisville blacks and whites lived in close proximity. Blacks in antebellum days had lived in small cabins or shacks, which were located on the same streets as their masters' homes or else resided in the alleys behind these houses. After the Civil War, Louisville's blacks remained in white neighborhoods. In the late 19th century, it was not uncommon to see neighborhoods where whites occupied large houses and blacks lived in smaller ones on the back streets and alleys. Several factors led to the virtual end of the integrated housing pattern that existed in the 19th century Louisville. The changing occupational structure of the city meant that more blacks began to be employed in tasks other than working in the homes of whites. With an improved transportation system available in Louisville by the mid-1890s, those whites desiring to do so moved to the outskirts of town and commuted to work. Now, what that states, as I mentioned at the beginning, when you are the dominant structure or the dominant power structure of the city, you can dictate how words are expressed. So in here, it speaks of a change in working structure. Well, what it really should say is that when blacks were no longer slaves, that is the working structure that they are speaking about, that was the issue. So the issue that Louisville whites had was the fact that they no longer had control over the black population. They no longer worked for them. Those were the issues. It's stated here, but in the way that it's worded, you have to kind of deconstruct the wording. Now, this is what we're going to start to take a look at these various alleyways that are in existence. Now, these images is what I was speaking of. These are images from the Library of Congress, but the way in which that these images were archived, it was very, very hard to tell exactly what year and what these pictures were taken. So on the archival listing, it said post 1933. But from what I could tell, that building was built in 1993. So these pictures are post 1993. Now, what time after that, I'm not really for certain. Yes, it looks like it's way before 1993, but these pictures are post 1993. Yeah. So the top picture to the top left, that image is actually taken right on this street back here, which is Cedar. That building that you see there is a library that once existed. So as you all leave out of the parking lot, you can actually see that alleyway that exists there. Now, this house at the bottom, this house in particular, I hope you can see from the image, but there is an alleyway in the front, and you can see how the front door from this house is actually facing the alley. Now, what's interesting about this house is this house has wood siding on it. So wood siding was used on houses in the late 1800s. So it's safe to say that this house was built anywhere from 1890 to about 1910. And as you see, this house is still standing, and it looks like on the side they have put electricity into the house. So somebody was living in the structure still. And then, of course, the house next to it, and that house is one that's also in the alley, but it's unclear if the front door is actually facing. But you can tell that that house has had some updated siding put on it. Now, the same as the one on the top right, that's another clear alley. You can tell by the cobblestones, also the placement of the electrical lines. Now, this house, it resembles a shack. Is what you would think of it when you see it, but this is actually a house that somebody lived in as well too. Now the siding that you see on there, that is a facade that they would put on top of the wood siding, because the wood siding now, some individuals still use it, but it's very hard to come by. So even at this time, instead of them actually trying to update the siding, they just decided to put a facade to kind of cover up the imaging of it. And again, it's important too to remind you that this image is post 1993, okay? So those ideals that those individuals had during white flight, to think of these individuals that come from these neighborhoods coming out of these alleyways. So if they were to still see images of them leaving, it still looks as if the same way that it potentially did when they lived there next door to them. Okay, here we have some continued images. This first one on the left, if you look what that van is, the van is actually facing a main street. And then further up the alley, you can see this first house is there on the left side, and there's some additional houses potentially on the right side. This next image across to it as well, this is also an alley. This is wider than the other ones, but you can tell this is an alley by the way that the house on the far left and the house on the far right, how those houses are positioned. And there's only a few structures that you actually see down that alleyway. Now, important too is to note that because those houses are not there, it does not mean that that area was not a potential property lot. So what we have here is an actual layout of the city. This was also in the same collection as those images, so I only can assume that these images here are also post 1993. And so this shows, the first one shows Congress Street, which is an alley, Eddy Street, which is an alley, Stone Alley, Madison Alley, and Plymouth Court. And again, this is from 15th Street to 18th Street. So 18th is here, and then 15th Street will be 3 blocks that way. Right? This next one, of course, is the next western portion of Russell. So this one goes from 18th Street to 21st Street. And as you can see, this one is a lot more congested, where you can see all the different property lots that are in existence. So in this bottom portion, you can see a larger influx of these property lots that exist in the alley. It's almost a whole row here. It's a whole row that exists here, a whole row that exists here as well. Rows that exist here. So from this image, what one can assume, what one can suggest is that the reason in which where you don't see houses in the alleys is because somebody in history purchased that whole lot. It's not to state that there was not the potential to have a house built in that alley or that somebody did not live there. It simply is just suggesting that whoever came after that purchased and collapsed the lots together. All right, now these, of course, are images of what you will see now from the alleys. The images on the right are from Logic. So through Logic, you can pull it up and you can see anybody's property lot that exists inside of the city of Louisville. You can see when the property was purchased, who was purchased by, and how much the property actually went for. So again, here with this industrial area, you can see how you have these larger portions of these single property lots that would have been purchased and grouped together. So this also was evidence to state that these property lots probably always any patterns that you see here. All the property lots are about the same portion. So one can suggest that they all resemble this model that's here. And that the only reason that they don't resemble their model is because we have industries that come in and buy them, or you have other people that are building apartments or middle housing that are combining these types of lots together. Now, there are some instances that you can see in the neighborhood where individuals have purchased those properties, but you can still see each individual property lot on the big piece of property that they have purchased. Interestingly enough, this building that's right here on the corner of 17th and Congress Street, to the left here is, of course, is an industry, but on the side of this building, if you all ever get a chance to, there is still a metal hook that is stuck into the building. And of course, it suggests that that was a place in which they would strap and tie slaves to as they were in the process of selling them or transporting them. But that hook still exists on the side of that building there, though. Okay, now this image is looking west from the corner of 16th Street and Eddy Street, which of course is an alley. And again, here you can also see that same type of trajectory for the possibility that those property lots. So again, you see here with this L-shaped lot was purchased, and you see on this other side, of course, where these lots go here. So this is telling you that this property line ended here, and that all of this back here at one point in time was houses that faced the alley. It's showing that clearly right there from the way that this is broken up. So this is stating and showing that the Russell community is reflective in its housing patterns of these alleyways and living, because these property lots are still available and they are still prevalent there. Now again, with this one for Plymouth Court, of course, you can see those same things. If you follow Plymouth Court from the very left tip of the picture all the way to the right, you can see all of those various properties adjusting and bunting up against that alley. But again, this is Plymouth, not Plymouth, but Shepherd Park. So with this aerial view, one can almost suggest too that oval shape is potentially the black pool that was covered up also as well to the side of that park. Now here with Green Alley, you see the same thing that I was suggesting from 2 slides ago. So with this portion, you actually see with this housing construction that they did, they provided this extra parking lot in the back, but these are clearly 2 different sets of actual property. So you can see from here that this all back here was the potential to have home shacks or other housing for African Americans or blacks. And then here too, with this is a new construction It's an attempt to build a court, but none of these houses face a front street. This is the front street here, and these houses are facing inside of it. So it's suggesting still too that the individuals that live in this community don't want to see the front street. As long as they can see something, they should be fine. That's what that is suggesting. And now this is from 20th Street and Esquire Alley. This one is the one that I was speaking of. So these parking lots that you see here is from the funeral home that exists on Broadway. What you can see here, they purchased this lot, purchased this here in this. They are still sectioned off in different property lots of what they're going through. So this is further evidence to state that the majority, if not the whole neighborhood, was in fact broken up into two tiers. Where you have the house in the front, and you had another house or structure in the back. This is just showing that same pattern when you see the neighborhood even in 2025. Now this is 24th Street and Esquire Alley. If you are familiar with the neighborhood, then at the end of this alley is the side of AutoZone. Just to throw that out there in case you're familiar with the neighborhood. Now here you see some very unique patterns. This H court, there was no signage on the street for that existence. I had never heard about H court until I pulled Logic up, and that's how they have that labeled. But if you follow the court up, you can see clearly here where they have, where these individuals, I would assume, I think that they probably have some type of reference that their property line goes back here, only because we have this easement that goes right through here. So this is very unique that there's a separation, there's a gap between even where the front property and where the alley property would have been located. Again, you see this also over here, when you have this other easement that goes into the back here, and then you have these potential property lots that are just existing off of the easement. This is not even technically an alley. At one point in time, it possibly would have been a nail, it's more like a grassy path that existed. Right, and now this one, of course, is a little bit farther west, and it's looking at almost that same section. So where you see this pinpoint at, this is that area where you see this additional court that they are trying to build. But if you follow any of these alleys in this portion, you can see that they had ample housing that exists. Now on this one, yes, this is, I believe, one of the last ones. Now here in particular, this is one of the alleyways that kind of also sparked my interest. One of my nieces actually used to live in this house right here. The house is no longer there, but she lived in a house that actually faced the alley. So this parking lot that's right here, this is actually what used to be the DAV. It's like a community-owned organization of business that's there now. But right along through that alley, there used to be even more homes that were constructed there. And this one, of course, is unique as well, too. This alley is actually an alley that was behind one of my sister's houses. She used to live where this dot is at. Her home is no longer there, but you can still see where they have that actual property lot, and that stuff is sectioned off. So these properties here, where you see these parking lots that actually belong to, was it Quinn Chapel? Or no, Zion Baptist Church. Right there. So they purchased this property right here where this marker is at. And from them also too, with their investment, which purchasing those properties, this alleyway actually got paved over in the late 1990s. All of this back here was cobblestone. When my sister lived there was nothing but cobblestone in the back of this alley. But with the church investing money in the neighborhood, the city actually added money to be able to pave it, to put a little bit of a facelift on it. Okay, so now we get to what does all of this mean? I've showed you the historical roots for Black Louisvillians with their fight for social power, their fight for political power, and their fight for economic power. But because they were rooted in the alleyways as these alley dwellers, the dominant white power structure of Louisville was never saw them as equal, and some could actually argue today that it is still such, that they do not see them as equals. So these are some various social theories that help to explain this mindset, these white supremacist ideals that these individuals had. So this first one is functionalism. So I was stating to you from that one passage that I read, it stated in there that the living patterns in Louisville changed when the working patterns changed. That working pattern that changed was Black people being freed. So they served the function of a worker and nothing else. So when they broke out of this format from the white dominant society and they no longer served that function for them, they were no longer needed. So they remained in the area of the city that they were at, but there was no other investment given to that area to help it out. It was simply left the way that it was. Also, too, we have conflict theory. So conflict theory states that there is a fight over means and goods. So even in Louisville's early inception, the first city in Kentucky to be able to pull taxes in 1828, and then just 2 years later, here it is, a Black person buying property. So there's an immediate fight that exists 2 years inside of its inception, inside of a city that is trying to maintain through a dominant white power structure. So there's conflict amongst the individuals because this is property potential that they want to buy, and this is potential area that they want to be in. So there's a constant conflict that's going back and forth. This other part, this symbolic interactionism, is also related to the work structure. So the work structure, if somebody owns you, you don't get a chance to freely interact with that individual. Your interaction with that individual is limited. So if you are owned that individual for hundreds of years, then that individual has a certain feeling or approach or a certain understanding about those interactions. So those interactions are used to symbolize that they have the power or the authority over you. So once Black individuals were freed, the way that symbolic interaction worked, they no longer could fully dictate and control. So you have this white dominant power structure that wants to continue this symbolic interaction, and then you have this free Black population that is stating that interaction is no longer welcomed by us. We no longer agree to that interaction. So again, you have this constant conflict and this push, pull, and strain that's going back and forth inside of the city of Louisville. Another one at play, excuse me. Yes, the other one at play is cultural hegemony. So with cultural hegemony, when you have a dominant group, the dominant group seeks to reinforce their power through a construction of various institutions such as religion and education, and through economic means. So if you simply look at the ability for Blacks to have jobs that pay a living wage, once they were free, you can see that and use that as an example of the white dominant power structure using this cultural hegemony. They were trying to secure in the fact that they would be able to continue down the path of what they saw themselves on. And of course, they did not want to afford those abilities in any institution, whether it was education, religion, and definitely not housing. Now, Louisville itself is very interesting. Louisville sits at the base of several different U.S. Supreme Court cases. So this one in particular right here is one of the earliest instances you see of a white dominant power structure actually attempting to create laws and regulations to dictate where Black people could live at. So this case, Worley versus Buchanan, happened in 1914 on the corner of 37th and Florence Avenue, which you can see right here on the side of the slide as well. So this ordinance that the city of Louisville had passed was a similar ordinance that existed in a lot of other Midwest cities at this time. So what they were basically stating in this zoning ordinance that Black individuals cannot move or be in white dominated areas or white dominated blocks or white dominated streets. So this Black individual, Mr. Worley, he strategized with other members of the NAACP and he had the bright idea to challenge this ordinance. So the way in which he went about challenging the ordinance is he actually purchased some land from Mr. Buchanan. The land that he purchased did not have a structure on it, but when he purchased the land, he also gave him an intent to build a house there. So what he did, he was stating that he was going to be a black individual living in this dominant white neighborhood, which by this ordinance that Louisville created was not allowed. So what Mr. Worley did, after the contract was signed by Mr. Buchanan, he refused payment. So since he refused payment to Mr. Buchanan, who was a white individual, Mr. Buchanan sued him for the money. So the case, of course, went to Louisville, went to state court, and then it went to federal court. Now, because this was a contract where you had a black man that owed white man money, even though inside of the city there was an ordinance that stated that he could not live there, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Mr. Worley must pay the money and that he could build a house there. So that was the first time that blacks in Louisville were able to strike down a racialized zoning ordinance to dictate what they could live in. Now, as was stated earlier, right around the 1920s, that's when the Russell neighborhood in particular became predominantly black. But that is not, of course, the first instance, or that is not the beginning of a large black population inside of the Russell neighborhood. So during this era from 1920 to about 1950, the blacks inside of the Russell neighborhood and throughout the city of Louisville, of course, were just looking for livable wages, better places to live, equal access to various other things inside of the city. But at the same time that they were just simply trying to stand up the dominant white power structure inside of the city and across the country was thinking of new ways that they could be able to formalize government-sanctioned violence towards these black people in regards to their housing and where they could live at. So in 1926, the Russell neighborhood was named after Harvey C. Russell. And of course, like I stated, it became predominantly black in about the 1930s. The 1940, the neighborhood became known as Louisville's Harlem due to the black-owned businesses. So from about 5th or 6th in Muhammad Ali, which used to be Walnut, down to about 18th to 17th Street, there was over 100 black-owned businesses. Now, these black-owned businesses did two very different things. One thing that they did is that it allowed for the black population to be able to maintain and contain some sort of its own money. It also allowed them autonomy as far as their shopping and their leisure. But the thing that the city of Louisville did not like is that they were not able to get any of the money that the black people were making because they were spending it with each other and not with him. So, of course, with Louisville and other cities, as they begin to see these black populations who they were trying to oppress begin to rise up, they begin to structure other mechanisms to begin to try to maintain and control them. So in this time frame, around the 40s, when you had this Louisville's Harlem, these dominantly black businesses that exist in the side of the Russell community, there were still portions of white individuals that lived in the Russell community. So it was stated in 1937 and in 1945 with the different floods that Louisville had, that some of the remaining white individuals that lived in the neighborhood began to leave out. Oh, sorry, to finish leaving out rather. So as I was speaking on these various forms of sanctioned governmental violence against black populations and these various ways in which they were trying to mandate and to dictate where individuals could live at, you had these other continued ordinances that came up. Now you had these restrictive covenants and so forth that came up, and you actually also had the Homeowners Loan Corporation, who was responsible for doing the financial risk maps, which we all know now today is the redlining maps. So during this whole time frame in Louisville's history, is this Black population of the Russell neighborhood that stemmed and came from the alleys, is attempting to stand up as Louisvillians, as the citizens, to be respected and to be noticed and just to be appreciated. You have the power structure in Louisville and the power structure across the nation formalizing and allowing these various laws and policies to enact violence against individuals. So as you see here, as it states, it says Seattle is blighted by restrictive covenants. And this other one is actually showing you some of the wording that they use in these restrictive and racial covenants. So it was very reflective of what was used in the ordinance for the Buchanan Worley case. But what made these restrictive and racial covenants very different is the fact that you have the coming from a private seller to a private buyer. The earlier ordinances that the city was trying to do, they were trying to make those ordinances citywide. So when you do it citywide, it becomes an issue, but when you have it from a private seller to a private buyer, that's more of a personalized issue. So even that case went to the Supreme Court, and racial restrictive covenants was allowed across America based upon this case that's listed here. All right, now here we have the 1937 Homeowners Loan Corporation redlining security maps. Now these maps, the map that you see, this is the map that I constructed for my dissertation from various GIS data files, and I was actually able to get the redline data files from Mr. Mark Bowman, as he was constructing his redlining maps circular for the city. He shared his data with me. So as I was stating and speaking of these historically Black neighborhoods, before I give a conversation and dictate what these various colors actually mean, I need to show you on the map where these Black communities are at. So here, right here, this is where Russell is at. This area here would have been where Little Africa was at. It's now Parkland. The Newburgh area is right around here. And then we have Berrytown. So Berrytown is actually, I believe, either here or here. So even during this time, Berrytown was not part of the city of Louisville. It had yet to be incorporated in the city of Louisville. Now, we have these 3 or 4 different grades. So they go from A to D, with the highest grade being this green. Then you go to brown, then blue, and then to this pinkish fuchsia color. So the areas that are listed in green, these are the areas that have the least risk of financing. Okay, the least financial risk, but these areas are also to the areas where you will find white collar, second to third Americans that live there. These places do not have any European immigrants that live in these high grades. You have to be American born, white individual to be considered part of this highest grade of these financial risk groups. Now, the next segment that you see, this brown, so in the brown, you can see second, third generation whites in America. You might see some immigrants, but even in there, still you will not see a lot of European immigrants. That would be more so of the business class, not professional class of individuals who live there. And then in the third grade, you see, this is where you have, of course, American-born whites. You also have European immigrants. And this is where you have all of the blue-collar workers will be in these areas that are labeled as C. Now, D specifically, any area of the city that had Black people living in it was automatically labeled as D. No matter what their job was, no matter if they were a slave or if they were free, that part didn't matter. If you were Black, if you lived in that community, it was instantly labeled as a D. Now, this is the same, of course, in every other city that is national constructed with. They are reflective of these same identifying patterns. So again, what you see is these Black communities who are thriving. So all of this is going on also at a time when America is changing up the way in which it's conducting home work. So now for the first time, America is changing up the ability to purchase homes, to individuals to create wealth. So at this time, the Black population was immediately left out because they were deemed as a financial risk. So engineered rents, people not deemed for any type of investment. So it's a further way in which that the white Louisville power structure, I got a chance to take these individuals who they look at as alley dwellers and attempt to put them back into the place that they see them to be at. Now, of course, as I stated, this map was made in 1937. These maps did not become public until almost 50 years later. So during all of that time, all of these various laws and these various funding patterns that were happening were going on under the noses of a lot of individuals in America, and definitely the individuals that were part of this fourth grade for funding and for financial risk. Those individuals were definitely left out of the ability to achieve that. Now, interesting, of course, is projects. So a lot of individuals are unaware that when projects were originally built, they conducted projects for white individuals, and they also conducted separate projects for black individuals to live in. So inside of the city of Louisville, you see the first projects begin to come in the late 1930s. So we have Clarksdale Housing Project, and then we have College Court. When those two projects were actually constructed, they were constructed to house white veterans. Now, Beecher Terrace was constructed with the intent to house black individuals. And now what happened inside of the city of Louisville is, as I had mentioned in the 1930s, they changed up the regulations and the ability for individuals to purchase homes. So a lot of these white veterans that were coming in now had the access to the GI Bill and various other things to be able to purchase these homes in these newly constructed subdivisions. So these white projects went uninhabited, in the city of Louisville, after about a year, almost 2 years, opened these projects up for black residents to be able to move into them. And now, of course, thinking about projects and the time and the terms that we might think about them now, one would think, why would the individual want to move in there? But what we have to understand is that at this time, the projects had amenities that a lot of people did not have in their homes. You say have individuals that were living in shacks, so you have people that might not have running water, electricity, or indoor plumbing. These projects came with that. So they attracted a large portion of the black population because of the amenities that they had. So what you also saw inside of these projects was a range of black people from various different classes now living together in these tight, close quarters. But again, that mindset and that ideology, that white superiority power structure that exists inside of the city of Louisville is not trying to extend its hand to help these residents out inside of these locations. So of course, once you have all of these black individuals that are now housed in this one particular project that is ran by the state, so it's state-controlled housing. So with that state-controlled housing, you can go a step further and dictate not just how much it is that you pay, but also dictate how an individual lives. Now, during this time too, of course, we had another war that was going on in America. So Louisville was another one of those places that had war economics. So of course, as I had mentioned, in the late 1900s, Louisville was attractive to a large black populations because of the various work that was available here. The same thing happened as well too around World War II with these war factories that were in Louisville. So it attracted large populations of individuals from all races to come to attempt to work inside of these factories. So these individuals, of course, making these wages, they were still not able to be able to live in the places of the city that they desired to, even though they had the money to be able to purchase it, because of where they were lived at was deemed by these financial risk as being unworthy of investing, unbeknownst to all of these people. So you're working as a part of the society. You're doing what you're supposed to do on your end, but the society is not rewarding you based upon the work that you are putting into it. Now, this, of course, is pseudo power. So I had mentioned earlier that Louisville has a polite form of racism that exists. So this is a clear example of that as well. So Louisville was also attractive to black individuals because Louisville actually had black police officers. But Louisville made it known that as a black police officer, you could only police black districts. your badge only worked amongst the people that look like you, and this is in the 1940s. Now, this image that you see, this is the first Black police officer. Her name was Bertha Weeby, and she was inducted into the police force in 1920. Now, one other way too, because the individuals in the city that are the ones controlling and making these laws to reflect their white superiority ideals, they know, of course, that by giving the Black population police, that it seems as if they're doing something that's positive, but the real root of it, they know that it doesn't really mean anything because they're not doing anything but doing neighborhood policing, which is what people did around this time anyway. So the only difference is they would allow certain individuals to have a badge, but that didn't really change up the way the neighborhoods were policed. All right, so moving on from 1960 to 2003. So again, I've been speaking that the Black population stemming from these alleys in the side of old Louisville, but side of Russell, the old historic Louisville. You can see them on the left attempting to stand up, attempting to be given their actual rights as citizens. And this other image is individuals in South Louisville. So these individuals in South Louisville, it's not an offshot to suggest that these individuals are potentially some of the descendants of the individuals that originally moved out of the Russell neighborhood when the first form of white flight actually happened. So inside of these two pictures, you see one side that is fighting for justice, and you see another side that is also fighting for their form of justice. So what you have is this animosity from these white individuals that were being forced from their neighborhood. So as they moved out and they began to have kids, they continue to tell the remembrance of these stories and these experiences of what their white neighborhood used to look like. And then this Black population came in and they kicked us out. So you have this continuation of this animosity that is always built up and churning because the sides are not able to speak together. Now, had there been something that was discussed, or had there been some form of equalized power during this time of Louisville's first growth with its Black population, there's a potential that instances like this would have not happened inside of the city. Okay, so this is a rundown from the various things, the civil rights passing from places, being integrated and so forth in the city. Now, what's not listed on here that is very important and also served to change up the trajectory of the Blacks in Louisville is, of course, urban renewal. So urban renewal happened in Louisville between 1950s and the early 1960s. It was conducted by the Bartholomew Planning Company. The Bartholomew Planning Company did a lot of different urban renewals throughout the Midwest. So what they were suggesting doing this urban renewal is that there was too much violence going on downtown. So these individuals wanted to strip away this downtown core. And this downtown core, of course, also include Walnut Street, where all of these booming Black businesses were located at. So during urban renewal, what they did is they took away the ability to have various housing in the downtown district. So of course, today when you go downtown, maybe some apartments that exist, but they actually used to be single family houses all the way up until like 3rd and 4th Street that existed downtown. But now, of course, those houses stop pretty much like about 12th Street, and then you have the projects that are kind of butted up against there right towards 9th Street. Okay, so with that urban renewal, they took away the Blacks that lived in the downtown district. All of the Black-owned businesses, of course, were stripped. So the Black population was pushed westward. Some individuals may have went out towards Newburgh, but the majority of the population went further westward. And so what they're also going on is that now, with your Black business district ending, you now have to take your Black dollars if you're spending them and use them in these white industries and these white locations. So now the city of Louisville has gotten what it was trying to get earlier. They now have the working money of these individuals as they are spending it because they don't have their own businesses and shops to be able to spend their money at. So here, you have the ability to get somebody's money without treating them fairly or treating them accordingly because they have to spend your money with you or where else is it going to go. Now, this is interesting enough, but this, I call this the Louisville Reset. And I only call this the Louisville Reset because of the things that led up to it. From the last slide, one thing I did not get a chance to mention is what happened in Louisville in 1967. So in 1967, Louisville passed the Fair Housing Act here locally a whole year before it was passed federally. So what that was supposed to do inside of the city of Louisville was it was supposed to eliminate the inability for Black residents to purchase homes or to move in various neighborhoods that they wanted to. Now, of course, with all of these generations and these decades of this forced segregation, and also these generations of the societal ideas that existed in the minds, by simply passing a law, you're not going to be able to undo the things that have already been done. So as early as 1970, of course, it was stating that the zoning regulations inside of the city of Louisville were mimicking patterns of redlining. So zoning and these ordinances and so forth, this is another way that you can actually dictate where individuals live at and how individuals live inside of your city. So even after Louisville chose to pass this Fair Housing Act, then they went back then and they rezoned various areas of the city to mimic the patterns that existed during redlining. So this is another example of this pseudo power or these fake grand gestures that are given to the citizens of the city. Because why is it you would pass this law and then you turn around and you implement something else to further conduct government sanctioned violence on the citizens? Now, we have this term spatial mismatch. So spatial mismatch is what happens when you take the individuals that live in an area and their goods and their services, and those are also stripped. So when you had white flight, before that, the white population, of course, existed inside of the Russell neighborhood around all these various industries and these businesses. So you have residents living here and they were working in walking distance. So when the white flight began to happen and people begin to move outward to the city, their economics, their finances, the funding, the new businesses left with them as well. So all of these new industries were existing outside of the neighborhood, but the mismatch exists because the people that they need to work at these places that are now out is going to be the population that lives here, because those jobs are the jobs that will actually pay them or the jobs that they can get, but those jobs are no longer in walking distance. So you see this across most urbanized American cities where you have all of these jobs that exist on the periphery that is directly reflective of the white flight that happened in this city and all of the industry following the movement of the people. And then, of course, we have court-ordered busing that happened in the 75, 76 school year. So this, too, it also goes on and it further exacerbates these ideals that were developed off of these early occurrences of these industrial slaves in the Russell neighborhood living in these alleyways. So then you have all of these years where there still hasn't been no kind of contact, no kind of reconciliation. And then you have this Black population who at one point in time controlled their money, control where they spent it, and also have their own educational structures. But with busing, the part that is always left out of the story is the amount of Black principals, Black counselors, Black teachers, and Black individuals that worked at those schools that lost their jobs. So now what you have is this Black population that is forced to go into these white schools that are still conducting, potentially having these white superiority ideals based upon the Blacks' original location of residents coming out of these alleyways. And since your students are forced to go to this school, because you're not going to necessarily have the money to send them to private school. You're not going to be able to send them out of state to another school. So they're forced to go to these schools. And then if you don't go, then the parent is locked up for truancy. So you have to send your kids. So now these individuals who have been participating in this government sanctioned violence based upon your residency are now enacting that government sanctioned violence inside of the institution of education. Now, in the late 90s, This is the first instance where we see inside the city of Louisville where any of the earlier projects that were built begin to get any type of facelift, any type of rehabilitation done to them. So Village West, that is on the eastern portion of the Russell neighborhood, they did a little bit of revitalizing that, and they took some of the units and they combined like 3 units into one, making some of the units a little bit bigger, so individuals had larger spaces to live at. But also too, not everybody that lived in those projects was able to go back into those projects. So for these decades and for the mindset of the city and other individuals or what these people in these projects, who these people are, they now begin to be dispersed throughout the rest of the city. So as they are being dispersed throughout the city, that identity and ideology surrounding their existence based off of them coming out of these alleyways transitions with them no matter where it is they go out inside of the city. And then we have the demolishing of Carter Homes in Southwick. So Carter Homes in Southwick, those projects were actually built right on the backside of what would have been Little Africa. That's exactly where they would have been. So when those projects were torn down, Hope 6 was involved. So Hope 6 had an ordinance or like a clause inside of their programming. So if anybody that lived in Carter Homes inside of one unit, if that individual had any type of a drug charge, that individual was not allowed to move back into the new structure. So on the face, that seems like that is something that is good. But if you have a grandmother who has a grandson living with her, and the grandson gets caught with a small piece of weed, that grandmother is no longer eligible to move back into those projects, to those new developments because of the regulations that Hope 6 put. So even with the advancements and stuff that they were attempting to do, there were still ways in which they were stopping certain individuals to be able to use these new amenities based on the ideals that they were associating with those people. And then in 2003, we had the merger of Louisville. So this, of course, is when you have the city of Louisville that merged in totality, except for Anchorage with the city of Louisville. So prior to the merger, the Black population that existed in the West End still hold various abilities for political will and for political power as well. So some situations, some instances, we were able to voice our opinions and to be heard before the merger. Now, after the merger happened, through various gerrymandering tactics, the voting power of the West End residents of Louisville was dispersed through the county. So what you see now, voting districts, see like all of this right here is going to be technically West Louisville. So it's kind of broken up into pieces. They take a small strip and they take one of them, put their voting along the line street. They take another pocket of individual left and they stretch their votes out here. So what this is doing is, of course, individuals that live here and individuals that live here will have some of the same issues and some of the same needs, but the bottom line of what needs to be here instantly is not going to be the same because of where they're living. It's 2 different main issues. So the city realized that if they draw those voting districts that way, then they could engulf the Black vote and the Black political power that existed inside of the city by simply including them with large portions of white residents. Then we have, of course, the continued destruction of the Black communities, because granted, everybody has opinions on what it's like to live in the projects or what those individuals go through. But if you have ever lived in there, if you know somebody has lived in there, you know that that is not the solid truth. And inside of these housing projects, especially the ones that are listed here inside of the city of Louisville, if you live in those projects, everybody in those projects pretty much treated everybody as family. I know another one of my nieces, she lived in Beach Terrace for a short period of time. And while I was there, if she needed anything, I simply had to go 2 doors down and knock on it, and somebody would drop a bucket out of a window with whatever I asked for in there. But when you take these properties away, or take these projects away, you are also taking away support systems that are there to support those individuals from those communities. So we had the destruction of Clarksdale in 2005. Iroquois homes torn down in 2012, followed by Shepherd Square. Now, interesting enough, of course, Iroquois has never been redeveloped. Shepherd Square and Clarksdale are both been redeveloped. So Shepherd Square, not Shepherd Square, but Iroquois in particular, to me, I feel like that is one that will never be rebuilt due to its proximity to the highway. Because of course, if you're going around 264 in that area of the city, when those projects were there for almost 2 or 3 minutes straight, that's all you saw riding was just the projects along the side of the highway. So I'm assuming that some individuals begin to complain, and when they tore those down, there has never been any plan to rebuild anything on those property lots that exist there. Now, in 2019, this is after Louisville passed its Fair Housing Act. This is after the projects have been torn down. This is after individuals have been able to purchase properties across the city, supposedly in places that they would like to. The city of Louisville was ranked the 4th most segregated city in America. And part of that also stated that 52% of the blacks in Kentucky lived in or next to Louisville's West End. So even as I started the conversation now with the talk of individuals being emancipated and coming up from other parts of Kentucky and coming up from other places further in the South, that is still evident that those individuals, when they come to this area, they are still moving into Louisville's West End because that has been the place that they have been able to call home for this time. Now with segregation itself, it happens in different ways, where there's different ways you can actually designate segregation. So we have evenness, exposure, clustering, centralization, and concentration. So these are all various separate aspects of segregation. But as I was doing my dissertation, I coined the term hyper-segregated. So a hyper-segregated community is one that is experiencing 2 or more of these different forms of segregation. Because that means, of course, that it is not the people themselves that are self-selecting to segregate, but there, of course, is other means, some kind of way at play that is forcing these individuals to segregate, or that is only allowing these individuals to be in a certain portion of said city. So when you are examining those segregations, you can look at it through residential stratification or through this idea of these ethnic enclaves. So both of these things, of course, is what happened inside the city of Louisville. The white population itself, as they begin to leave out of the West End and have white flight, they establish these ethnic enclaves. So as they begin to move out into their own communities, they begin to reestablish control, reestablish and formalize an economic system, reestablish and formulate a political system. Now, the stratification perspective, this is more stating that these individuals that are segregated that way is because they are forced to. So we see that, of course, with those various ordinances, those regulations and policies that I've shown, and also with the financial risk map, it shows clearly that the black population inside the city of Louisville and across America has been forced to segregate due to these various laws and policies that have been enacted. But two, do not forget that these laws and policies, especially the ones that were happening here locally, is reflective of the function that the black population was supposed to be conducting here inside of the city of Louisville, and also from those symbolic interactions that the white owners would have with the blacks that lived in the back or in the alleys behind their houses. Now, I'll leave you all with this quote. It's right here. Residential segregation is a product of one location. The individual's ability to choose their location is affected by their social mobility, race, life cycle, and socioeconomic status. Structural discrimination from institutions can heighten residential segregation through prejudice practices, resulting in self-selection segregation from the minority group or avoidance of segregation from the minority group based on race and social class. And my friends, thank you all. Now I open the floor up for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes. The question was, this young lady in the front stated, she thinks that they are rebuilding Iroquois. If that is the case, that very well may be, but of course it's been torn down now, was it going on 13 years? And usually if you turn in the project, at least inside the city of Louisville, the actual time which these plans are made public are done a little bit faster than that. I myself am not aware of any of those plans though. Yes, sir. So the question or comment was regarding the Hope 6 funding for the reconstruction of the various projects inside the city of Louisville. And they came under a little bit of fire also too with their regulation that they enacted about that issue about anybody in that unit. If one person had a drug charge, then nobody could come back. So there was a lot of a flack that they called from ex-residents or former residents of those projects. So it kind of caused them to change up their structure that they use on actual redevelopment properties, which is also why with the last project that was torn down inside the city with Shepherd Square, that they did not use Hope 6 because of those various reasons. All right. Yes, ma'am. So what? Mhm. Yeah, so during, of course, this era in which was brought up, the question was what was the city responsible for? What was the city liable for, or the real estate brokers and so forth that added into segregation inside of the city? So as white flight began out of the Russell community, or white flight began in any other city across America, real estate brokers realized that they had a great opportunity to make some money. There's actual documentation that the National Association of Realtors, they actually met and they developed a strategy that they call block busting. So to your point about there being like 10 blocks at a time you could go to, that is directly reflective of those practices that they use. So in block busting, what they would do is if you had a black family that was trying to purchase a home, they would take their family to a white community. And in their white community, they would find them a home. That home that they would give them would be 2, sometimes 3 times the price of that home. So not only would they get extra on that home, but they also knew once they put that individual there, that those additional white families on that block would begin to move out. So now this real estate agent is making money hand over fist because you're making extra money on the sale, well, the purchase rather, and then you're making this extra money on all of the sales from individuals that are now leaving out. So the real estate agents, the city officials, so forth, had a large part to play because they were definitely aware of these practices that were going on inside the city and also these practices that were going on nationally. Yeah, so there's, of course, there's an ample amount of research, different things you can point to. This question was more so gaining on where is the Black population of the West End going now, as we have white individuals moving back in, and also as the area becomes more gentrified. So it's interestingly enough, of course, that this whole conversation about money coming back into West Louisville is only a thing because the city announced the expansion of Waterfront Park. So now family individuals are seeing the possibility that the West End is actually worth investing in again. But since you have these families, as you were speaking of, that have been in these communities for generations and for decades, these individuals are now at threat of being potentially moved out or being forced out of their communities if in fact that these new developments come in and their property taxes in fact do begin to raise up higher. So to respond to that, there are some various agencies inside of the city that are offering various property tax adjustments. But the best thing that I can really suggest for individuals to be able to do is to make sure that you are speaking to your local representatives and also speaking with your community, because you have to also be able to demand that I've been here for this amount of time, and just because all of a sudden now you think I'm investing in does not mean you get the right to kick me out.
And let's give Dr. Douglas one more.
I didn't realize when damage over time. I thought it was like, yeah. I thought it was like 6.